Hello and welcome to Radical Engagements and another week, another Jamie Merchant article. I've liked Merchant's output lately and I really wanted to discuss it. But this time we're discussing an article in Heatwave magazine, a magazine that, although it only has 2 issues and not a ton of articles yet, I have so far mostly liked. And I don't say that a lot. Um, so we're going to look at an article from their dossier on tariffs, written by Jamie Merchant in May of this year. Which I think may even pick up on some of the themes that he discussed in the Baffler article, but in a clearer, more limited way. Maybe I should ask Merchant on the show sometimes. I don't know. I never know when I should ask someone on, but I guess if people want to write a response, and if Jamie Merchant listens to this and we have some mutual friends, but I have no idea if he knows who the hell I am, I'd be interested in talking. But let's get into it. Tariffs as a class offensive. Byline. Properly contextualized. I need to share it. I need to share my screen here. Byline. Properly contextualize the tariffs bumbling rollout as another embarrassing episode in the disintegration of the US-led global economy. But their role in this saga goes mostly unremarked in the current debates around trade. As part of his failing trade wars, Donnie Deals has proposed a 100% tariff on movies made overseas. Quote, the movie industry in America is dying a very fast death, the president exclaimed, although not dealing with the fact that it's as much about automation and AI as it is about anything else. Pointing to tax breaks offered to shoot overseas as a national security threat. Oh, man. If people could have understood the category inflation implied in all the Bush administration's Patriot Act reforms, they probably still would have done it, but it would have been even more funny if liberals had picked up on how far this was going to be used. Placing foreign movie makers in the same camp as government official military enemies might seem like a classic Trumpian hyperbole, but as often is the case, the president's social media noises are a window to a darker reality. Since Trump's first term and continuing into the Biden years, the US government has gradually redefined trade as a matter of national security. Trump was a change in this, I would say, but it's been maintained since the Biden years. So Biden did not undo this move. This was a far cry from yesterday's tale of globalization. In fact, I would say Peter Zion pointed out that tale of globalization, as told by the Friedmans of the world, was full of poop at this point. And even if you had competent management of the US-led global economy, if it was to stay US-led, it would have to Hadrian's Wall itself and allow other major players more stake in the game. In that happy fable, trade was an outworking of a competitive world market bound to link the globe in commercial harmony. Reducing trade barriers and opening up national markets to free flow of capital would attract foreign investment, creating jobs and rising incomes in the developing world. In turn, the multinational firms of the rich nations would profit from these investments, expand themselves, and continue to explore the technological frontier. Everyone wins in a beneficent order led by the virtuous steward, the United States avatar of capitalist freedom. And as you hear Merchant's sarcasm dripping from the pen there, so much for all of that. In Trump's Gothic rhetoric, trade is a scene of death and dying, a Darwinian struggle for survival. In this story, national growth happens not in cooperation with other nations, but at their expense. Kind of like a weird return to physiocrat logic in early modern France. But anyway, we'll get there. This is not a sharp break with president. His predecessor, Joe Biden, shared the same worldview. The so-called Bidenomics doubled down on presidents from Trump's first term. I mean, in such incompetent ways that allowed Trump to pivot against them and move even further to the right. But there is a continuity there. Not only keeping with Trump's tariff regime against China, but escalating it. The centerpiece of Biden's economic agenda was historic legislation designed to capture manufacturing investment from its supposed allies in Europe and East Asia. Biden's government threatened to penalize foreign producers if they traded with its official enemies in the industries deemed critical for the nation's national security. Like the Republicans, the Democrats pursue trade by extortion, and Trump, too, is a more rhetorically colorful version of the same berserker nationalism that has overtaken the economic stagecraft in the U.S. and dominates world politics today. Properly contextualized, the tariffs bundling rollout is another embarrassing episode in the disintegration of the U.S.-led global economy. But their role in this saga goes mostly unremarked in the current debates about trade. Instead, mainstream commentary talks about tariff policy in terms established by the Trump administration. They're evaluated as more or less effective method for achieving its official public goals. These typically include some mix of reindustrialization, which, by the way, doesn't really matter in a highly automated economy anyway, and debt reduction to be achieved by shifting demand for foreign products to home producers, which also wouldn't lead to debt reduction if it actually worked. It's a contradictory policy, and even liberals point that out, but nonetheless. The story goes something like this. A reinvigorated manufacturing base will put the U.S. industry on a newly competitive footing, reducing the trade deficit and the balance of payments. We already know that's not happening. The trade deficit is getting worse. The U.S. will no longer need to borrow so much, allowing a drawdown in government debt. Tariff revenue will replace taxes. I mean, tariff revenue is a tax, but it nonetheless. Unshackling American business to unleash a new wave of prosperity, and perhaps they will support U.S. military preparedness by relocating critical industries inside the company, appeasing a paranoid defense establishment. Can the administration pull it off? Is it economically feasible? Perhaps a comprehensive Mar-a-Lago Accord is waiting to be unveiled. It has not yet been forthcoming, and we are half a year past when this was written, revealing Trump's master plan to the world. To some, it all seems so chaotic, so unplanned, and so incompetent that the idea of a rational basis for it beggars the imagination. Others have warned against the risk of sane-washing Trump's agenda by imposing some grand strategy on what might be nothing more than a historic grift. Of course, Trump's entourage is taking every chance they can to plunder whenever and wherever they can, even fleecing their own contemptuous supporters. I mean, see the big, beautiful bill. But to see nothing but kleptocracy would be an overcorrection, missing the political effects of Trumponomics behind the official policy debates. Tariffs are part of Trump's unique lizard brain obsession, an idea fixe of reality TV real estate tycoon since the 1980s. But their broader historical meaning lies in the context of a gradual collapse in capital investment and profitability that pushes national governments to adopt ever more extreme measures in order to continue appropriating their aliquot parts of a stagnating global pool. After all, you got to keep that forex currency reserve valuable by something. This shows up in virtually every major empirical indicator. GDP growth rates across the capitalist world have drifted downward for decades. I pointed it out myself, including in its supposedly most dramatic news centers like China, which I pointed out myself as well. Labor productivity and productivity gains from technology measured by what economists call total factor productivity have both been steadily decayed as productive investment has dried up. You can see AI try to remotivate this, but so far it's only really helped the chip producers for AI, which is apparently holding up most of the stock market right now. Somehow it feels like if that doesn't go out to other industries, that maybe even large capital holders are going to have a hard time buying stuff since they're spending money on an energy intensive product that so far has only led to marginal productivity gains and very little profitability gains. And they're doubling down on it because they don't have any other ideas. Both have steadily decayed as productive investment has dried up. We also saw productive investment drop in other areas. Such investments are decreasingly profitable as the world's capitalists, so nation states must bribe them to invest by throwing trillions of state money at them in the forms of tax breaks, subsidies, grants, and federal contracts. This is what Robert Brenner called political capitalism. Now, my rejoinder that was past populism was always political, but there is a sense in which there increasingly is a feedback loop on pushing money into these things to increase liquidity so liquidity can float the market. Such investments are increasingly profitable for the world's capitalists, so nation states must bribe them in order to invest, throwing trillions of state money at them in the form of tax breaks, subsidies, grants, and federal contracts, particularly federal contracts. Almost all your big billionaires became that billionaires by federal contracts and then have been subsequently trying to solidify their place by getting rid of those federal contracts for other people. This was the point of yesterday's enthusiasm for a celebrated return to industrial policy in the Biden years, now but a distant memory, because they don't want to subsidize this anymore. Corporations, in turn, increasingly depend on cheap credit to finance their activities or even just to continue existing. This is the case with the symptomatic zombie firms, unprofitable concerns that survive on easy credit and make up something around 20% of the U.S. public companies. Consequently, the declining profitability of capital shows up most dramatically in the permanent explosion of government and private debt. These trends afflict not only rich countries, but also middle and low-income nations of the global south, in which the limit has all but stalled out, most strikingly seen in the phenomenon of premature deindustrialization. I mean, MMTers would say that this was always going to be the case, that government debt would always be high here. I am more agnostic on this, but I do think the MMTers have a point in that there is a real sense in which fiat currency is dependent on government debt to be out and about. What is causing this breakdown? Consider the question of profits. Trump thinks profits come from deals. Economists think profits would be competed away in a fair market. Neither understands their source and their function in the broader capitalist economy as a class-based order in which the dominant class extracts their wealth from coerced toiling majority. In this society, profits come from the protein fire of human drives and creativity, labor power. I mean, this is just Merchant being a classical Marxist. If labor power is the ultimate source of profits, then the drive to ever higher productivity that defines capitalist mode of production is also its undoing. Also classical Marxist. As that source is progressively displaced by a more advanced capital-intensive production, aka has more robots, the total amount of profits available system-wide to reinvest and expand diminishes, aka prices go down to cost because they need to compete in the market unless monopoly is established. To establish monopoly, you need to turn commodity production into rents, which have a steady stream of income and profitability, but also are subject to like all kinds of other problems and really are wealth transfers more than creating new value. Okay, at least that is how classical Marxism would understand it. The planetary ossification of industry overwhelms the capacity of the world markets to observe its output, intensifying the pressure of competition. Eventually, in the process of accumulation reaches a limit in which the profit it is able to produce isn't enough to further expand accumulation on a greater scale. This, the general crisis of overaccumulation, underlies the shattering of the world capitalism today. I mean, this is classical paradigmatic theory, aka classical Henrik Grossman theory. Breakdown in capitalist growth is eventually destructive to societies because it condemns them to a distributional struggle over shrinking resources. I do think there's some truth to this. Capitalism is based on the class opposition between capitalists and workers they exploit. If productivity is growing, profits can be shared with the working populations in the form of higher wages and salaries. But if it slows or stops, the economic surplus that goes to that class with the power to decide who gets what. Oligarchs get richer as inequity grows, more savage by the year. Institutions break as the frail bonds that held society together come apart. The fuse is lit. Now, what does this have to do with tariffs? The elites are well aware of this. Popular rage at permanently following government institutions consistently threatens to boil over. The climate crisis threatens the basis of the human civilization itself. Planetary upheaval looms. For the capitalist class, whose most repulsive members now simply run the U.S. state directly, the most prudent course is the empowerment of domestic security and surveillance forces through an equally empowered, unconstrained executive. Erratic tariff policies that are unpopular, even with many capitalists themselves, are part of the deal, as Trump would probably say. In the short term, they may be inconvenient. In the long term, they are part of a fortification of class power through a newly emboldened crackdown state. They may even coerce some favorable concessions from rivals, allowing uncompetitive industries to limp along a bit longer. And then, in this sense, they are indeed a policy of national security. If interstate conflict was notably absent in the days of globalization, it's because the least of all nations were getting rich by plundering their national working classes. Now, the fact that they turn on each other like ravenous dogs is a harbinger of capitalism's autumn, or at least a return to World War One like conditions, because we've seen this before. And maybe that's a problem with not realizing that war can reduce an overproduction crisis. A sure sign that growth, like the mental faculties of our rulers, is expiring. Seen in this light, the tariffs are neither more or less rational policy choice, nor solely an elaborate grift. They are a part of a two-front worldwide class war unfolding between the national bourgeoisies on one hand, and between them and the proletariats of their respective countries on the other. That is, a tariff is a recipe for a new ruling class offensive on the workers of the world against the backdrop of accelerating global decline. Ironically, a lot of those workers will support the tariffs because they think they're going to benefit from protectionist trade. They express an economic breakdown of capitalist society in political form, aka one hopes. And this is actually a remarkably optimistic thing because it hopes that capitalism can't overcome through either management or sheer destruction of commodities forms of capitalist accumulation. And I say this because that's actually a real problem, and it's one that I think a lot of people on the far end of the far left have been a little bit too sanguine on working automatically. We've seen these things come out before, and it's been predicted every 30 or 40 years by socialists that we are in the final crisis, and there's some new management form to restore profitability or to manage uh, liquidity in ways that make it seem like profitability doesn't matter. I do think Merchant may be underestimating that may come again, and that there are other reasons why our particular form of governments is leading to such kind of decline. Which is not to say I think Merchant is wrong here. I do think there's been a profitability decline. I think that's why things are shifting increasingly over to rents. I think that is why we're seeing returns to tariffs and fighting over more scraps. But I also think it's a little bit wrong to think that this is just going to automatically lead to a breakdown in capitalism, because we've seen this happen before. Keynesianism was a way to handle this. Fascism was a way to handle this. World War II and One were ways to handle this. Now, I don't have a conspiratorial worldview that thinks that the capitalists came together and decided to have competition between themselves to destroy enough commodities to free up the market. I just don't think that that's how this works. I think the tensions between capitalist societies make that kind of conflict more likely, because the capitalists are not just fighting with forces external to their class, but the contradictions within their class become heightened. But I also think the idea that these profit rates are totally expressed in things like declining GDP means that we have to accept that the profit rates are measurable in just currency. And I don't know that they are. Also, I'm not sure that high debt loads mean the same thing in an era of fiat currency when commodity currencies were the dominant ways of trade, or at least commodity backed currencies were. I do think that you do need a more nuanced view of money for this to totally work. But I'm not willing to totally throw the declining rates of profits out, because I do see evidence that there is a decline on profitability and a decline on investment, which is why you get weirder and weirder economic investment organs that have bizarre patterns that don't really match commodity productions, because traditional commodity production is not super profitable in that its returns are relatively low, even when you invest in them. Anyway, check out more of Merchant's work and read Heatwave Magazine. Protect your peace. Like and subscribe. Hit the bell. There's always more where this came from. I'm always producing. For those of you who've been commenting on my health, I am much better. I am not in as much pain. My voice has pretty much stayed normal. I'm going to start exercising again soon, and we're on the road to recovery. Thank you.